Presiding Officer, can I join others, first of all, in congratulating Steve Clarke and the Scotland men's team for qualifying for the World Cup. They have done the entire nation proud. I actually remember rushing home from school to watch the Scotland-Brazil game in 1998 and the absolute jubilation when John Collins scored that penalty against Brazil, only for the goal that followed. But anyway, we enjoyed John Collins scoring that goal, and honestly, I am so proud that my kids are going to get to experience Scotland at a World Cup and cheer that on and develop their own memories for generations to come. Presiding Officer, later today, the COVID inquiry report on political decision-making will be published. COVID-19 shook all our lives, with thousands of lives lost in Scotland. The UK COVID inquiry is vital, so we can learn lessons, acknowledge mistakes and give answers to mourning families. Given that John Swinney was central to the operations of the Scottish Government before, during and after the pandemic, does he regret deliberately deleting evidence for the inquiry, frustrating its process, and will he take this opportunity to apologise?
First Minister.
COVID-19 was an incredibly difficult period for everyone, and I express today my heartfelt sympathies to everyone who lost a loved one during the pandemic, and also to those who suffered a tremendous level of disruption to their lives. Ministers acted at all times based on the best information that was available to them at the time, and I have set out to the COVID inquiry the basis of decision-making in which I was involved and which the Scottish Government took incredibly seriously to ensure that we took the necessary action to protect the population, where there was no guidebook about what we were dealing with in relation to COVID-19. We supported establishing a public inquiry so that all governments can learn the necessary lessons for the future, and that's exactly what the Scottish Government will do. And in all of the actions I took in relation to information, I took those actions consistent with Scottish Government policy.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney was the Deputy First Minister who deliberately deleted evidence shameful and unforgivable. He was the Education Secretary who shamefully downgraded the exam results of working-class kids, and he was the COVID Recovery Secretary that failed to deliver any recovery. But the most devastating decision made by ministers was to send COVID-positive and untested patients into care homes, even when it was known that older people were the most vulnerable to the virus. Over 100 COVID-positive patients were sent into care homes. Over 3,000 untested patients were sent into care homes. And the devastating consequence was over 4,000 people died with COVID in care homes. And this is now being investigated by the police. You don't need clinical advice to know that sending people with the virus to live with the people most vulnerable to the virus would lead to deaths. So will John Swinney apologise for this disastrous and catastrophic decision?
First Minister.
Sir, as I indicated in my first answer, the ministers at the time were dealing with an evolving situation in which advice was being formulated by scientific experts at the time, clinical experts assessing the right judgments to be made in dealing with an emerging and fast-changing situation. And ministers at that time were open with Parliament about the dilemmas and the challenges that were involved. And those decisions were subjected to scrutiny by Parliament at the time, and they are, of course, being subjected to scrutiny by the COVID-19 inquiry. Now, I have been very clear that I regret the suffering that individuals experienced during the period of COVID. It did enormous damage to people. People lost loved ones. It did enormous damage to our society, and we are still dealing with the consequences of COVID. So I understand the scale of the impact and the damage that was done, and obviously, as I've indicated, the Government will listen carefully to the inquiry and respond accordingly to the recommendations that are made by the inquiry as we seek to learn lessons from what was a traumatic period in the country's history.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, you do not need clinical advice to know you don't send COVID-positive patients into care homes. Actually, right across the country, people have the common sense not to go visit their granny when they've got a cold, never mind putting COVID-positive patients into care homes. John Swinney was the Minister for COVID Recovery, and this was supposed to be the COVID Recovery Parliament. But look at where we are. At the start of this Parliament, there were 16,798 Scots waiting 4 hours in A&E in 1 month. Now it is 45,639. At the start of this Parliament, there were 1,810 waiting for 8 hours. Now it is 15,821. At the start of this Parliament, there were 96,053 waiting for inpatient treatment. Now it is 155,849. And at the start of this Parliament, there were 391,938 waiting for an outpatient appointment. Now it is 559,077. John Swinney promised recovery and he delivered catastrophe. A shameful record and one he can't delete. So isn't it clear that we can't afford another 5 years of this? And what Scotland needs is to recover from John Swinney and the SNP.
First Minister.
One of the many flaws in the argument that Mr Sarwar has just put to me is that he's comparing this moment today with the start of this parliamentary term. In the start of this parliamentary term, the country was still dealing with COVID. We were still in the midst of COVID. We still had the pause for at least a year beyond the start of this Parliament on routine scheduled cases because of the priority to sustain the National Health Service during that period. So the idea that Mr Sarwar is comparing like with like ignores, as he always does, the reality of the COVID pandemic and its significant disruption. Now, what I can reassure Mr Sarwar about is that under my leadership, the scale and activity of the National Health Service is increasing to tackle those very issues. We had more than 10,000 extra outpatient attendances for September compared to August. Activity in our National Health Service has increased, with more than 31,000 extra appointments and procedures from April to September compared to the same period in 2024. We are now seeing the total list size and the longest waits coming down. We are also treating more people, with activity increasing significantly compared to last month and last year. So the action that Mr Sarwar is calling for of increased NHS activity, increased procedures, increased solutions for the people of Scotland is happening, and it's happening under my leadership, and it's going to carry on happening under my leadership because I'm determined to support our population to recover from COVID.